Good morning, Steve. How are you?
Good morning, Dan.
Hey,
Good to see you.
good, and we have a special guest with us today. For some reason, we talked Mr. Matt Forbeck into joining us to discuss a little creativity in RPGs. How are you this morning, Matt?
I am doing marvelous. It's a Sunday morning. I've been having fun with my wife and kids and way behind on deadlines, but I'm here to have some fun and chat.
Congratulations on becoming a new father-in-law.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that's been a wonderful experience. A nice young lady that my son has been dating for several years when they got into college and everything. And man, it's been great. She's wonderful.
So,
So
is this the first of the quintuplets that you got?
no, Marty is the oldest of ours. He's 23, he'll be 24 next month. And so he's ahead of the curve because then we have quadruplets who are 20 years old. So the four of them, none of them are currently on a getting married path, but we'll see how it goes.
um,
They're deep in their college years at the moment.
well, again, congratulations, and it's wonderful that the family's expanding.
Yeah,
And how with all those kids growing up, because I remember when they were little. You and I have known each other on and off for a while in a weird kind
yeah.
of way. I think back in the IDW days, you did some books
Hmm.
while I was an editor there.
Yep,
And
exactly.
that's how I know Steve. Steve was did a Star Trek books for me when
Ah,
I was
cool.
editor there. Um, but we're basically going to talk about creativity in RPGs, and if there's anybody who knows RPGs and creativity, it's Mr. Matt Forbeck.
I don't know, man. The funny part is when people say stuff like that, like, yeah, to most people, like, yeah, Matt knows. And I'm like, yeah, but I know like 16 other people who are probably just as good, if not better than I am. But that's because you're a professional in the field. That's what you do, right? You know
But
people who do this kind of stuff.
you've done a wonderful job faking it. So
Yeah, I tell people you fake it till you make it.
and
Um,
and we can't get the real people that know it on this little dog and pony show. So
fair enough. Fair enough.
I think this is we're just new. I think this is our seventh,
uh,
Dan,
seventh or
maybe.
eighth episode,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So we're fledgling. So I really appreciate you being here.
Oh, that's good. I like to break in new podcasters. It's great.
Yeah, basically, Steve and I get together every Sunday morning for a cup of coffee and just discuss the D&D projects that we're working on and
Oh,
other
cool.
creative projects. And I apologize, you don't have the
Amazes and Muses mug. There we
yeah,
go.
that's our incentive
I
for.
have this is a classic mug.
Oh, Inquest, yes.
That's
And
fantastic. Oh my goodness.
right, I actually wrote for Wizard and Inquest back when I was fresh out of college or my middle 20s or whatever. They're both extinct nowadays, obviously, but this was one of their Christmas gifts way back when, was sending out all the writers' mugs, and I've still got the damn mug, believe it or
Hey,
Is
last
that like the magazine?
not.
I've got one issue of Wizard magazine left, and that's one where they covered the superhero happy hour.
Yeah. Fantastic. That was
Um,
good stuff. I actually liked Wizard and Inquest quite a bit back in the day.
all right,
Sad to see them gone.
so let's start off with a little D&D talk. There's
Sure.
you're familiar with the game. You've played a few times, I
I've heard
believe.
about it. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, we've got this one D&D coming out, and there's been all sorts of directions. It looks like that Hasbro's taken with Dungeons and Dragons, more of a I don't know, for lack of a better word, more of a corporate grasp
Yeah,
on it.
I agree with that. I mean, it seems to me that like they figured out that D&D can make boatloads of money. It can be one of their big brands. Wizards of the Coast is doing that for many years, right? Wizards, even though Magic outsells Dungeons and Dragons because collectible card games tend to outsell tabletop games, over the last 5 years or so, 7 years since fifth edition came out, Dungeons and Dragons has really just broken all barriers for itself, all sales barriers, all popularity barriers. There's more people playing it than ever before, even in its height of fame back in the 80s. So uh, when Hasbro looks and they say, well, we got G.I. Joe, Transformers, Magic the Gathering, and then they're like, oh, look at this Dungeons and Dragons thing coming up. Suddenly it's becoming one of their top brands. And I don't think it hurts that Chris Cox, who is the CEO of Wizards of the Coast, or the president, or whatever the heck his type, the top guy at Wizards of the Coast, is now the top guy at Hasbro, right?
Mhm.
He is the first guy to be the president of Hasbro that has not either been a member of the Hassenfeld family that founded it or one of their direct proteges, right? The last guy was a direct protege of Jack Hassenfeld or whoever. I get the names confused. I've read the history and know some of the people, whatever. But Chris is actually the first guy to come from outside of that group of Rhode Island essentially and work his way into that and now become the president of the company. So it's chances for fresh new directions. The fact that he was president of Wizards for several years before that means that suddenly Wizards of the Coast is going to get a lot more attention than it ever did before. That's all inside baseball bullshit, but there you go.
No, it's great. I remember my first when I was with IDW. I did I was there 2 weeks or so. They just gotten the Transformers license. I was brought on to do Transformers, even though when Chris Ryle called me and said, "What do you know about Transformers?" I said, "Optimus Prime's the good guy, Megatron's the bad guy," and he said, "You're hired."
You can
But I remember I went to the Hasbro office, and I didn't even have business cards yet, so we just made some temporary ones, printed them out there at the office at IDW, and I told them that was my rookie card. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely taken on a more corporate, especially with the movie coming out and their new edition. We're coming up on the 50th anniversary. It seems like it's a golden opportunity for them to establish Dungeons and Dragons more as a nerdy pastime and more of a multi-million-dollar IP.
Sure. I mean, they also bought D&D Beyond recently, so they're integrating the virtual tabletop stuff that was formerly owned by Fandom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they've also got at least one or two in-house video game companies. Took Games just got renamed as something like I don't remember the name now. A friend of mine, Lucian Solman, works for them, but they're an in-house studio under Wizards of the Coast doing video games. And Whitney Strix Beltran is working on an open world video game for Hidden Path Entertainment, right? So I know there's a lot of video game stuff going on. This is a brand that's just going to get bigger and bigger over the next 5 years. Right?
Okay, now let me ask you this: do we need to worry about the tabletop with more of a video game coming on?
Thing, tabletop, right? Movies? I mean, I know people are like, but I'm publishing my tiny little game here, and it's being shoved out by Wizards of the Coast. I'm like, guys, no, it's Wizards of the Dungeons and Dragons built the goddamn room we're all in for this stuff. And I say this as one of these publishers, right? They built the room. We get to set up our tables around it, but they own the place. Most people start playing Dungeons and Dragons and never play anything else, right? Like 80%, if not higher. And this is going back to third edition. They did surveys about this, and maybe it's changed over the years, but I don't think so. It's actually probably gotten more tilted to D&D. Most people start playing D&D and never try another game, right? And the trouble is, if you're a game creator, you think that everybody's like you and that you're an omnivore. Like I play anything, right? I'll play anything. I'll take it apart, see how it works, vivisect the damn thing. But most people are just happy to play a game with their friends, right? And if it happens to be Dungeons and Dragons or Catan or Cards Against Humanity or Apples to Apples or whatever, even Monopoly, which I hate, they're still just playing a game with their friends, which is really what the activity is all about, right? It's an excuse to get together and do something with people you like.
No, and it's an excuse to do weird things like with my Catacombs and Comedians, where I've got the stand-up comics, but I think and I've got to give credit to Wizards for with the third edition opening it up for people like you and I and other creators to get to be able to play in the sandbox and publish stuff. And where this will go with the new edition, I don't know. Maybe more of a DM's guild.
We'll see. I mean, it was Ryan Dancy who led that whole thing, opening up with the OGL, the Open Gaming License, and the SRD, the standard whatever the
reference document.
Reference document. Thank you. So he's the guy that actually spearheaded that stuff, and he was a child who basically was like, "Oh, in software, this is what we do. We do open source because people help us fill in the gaps that we're not interested in doing, right?" And it really helped out with it. You notice that fourth edition didn't do terribly well from a sales point of view. I think from a design point of view, it actually hit all of its design goals, and it's a pretty decent game, but it didn't do very well from a sales point of view. Part of that, I think, is because they never really opened it up to the OGL. Right. So Paizo was able to step in and say, "Hey, we actually, all you guys who don't want to move over to fourth edition, and the publishers were able to do it. We're happy to take over and do D&D 3.75 or whatever the hell you want to call it, Pathfinder 1.0." And basically ate their lunch there for a while. I mean, they were, you saw charts that said Pathfinder was actually outselling D&D in certain gaming shops. Overall, that's not true. I mean, Wizards was selling D&D, in every bookstore in the world. So. Certainly the numbers were in Wizards' favor, but it was the first time somebody actually came close to challenging their supremacy, right? And in fifth edition, what they did is they didn't open up to the OGL for about 2 years, right? And I think that was maybe okay because it meant that they were taking it slow, making sure everything was in place before they did it. And also they had some embarrassments that happened when they did the original OGL, where the guys over at White Wolf came out with a monster manual before the monster manual came out for third edition, right? And I think they want to make sure nobody was stepping in to do one of their big books like that.
Right.
But and by fencing it off for a year or two, they were able to pull that off. I'm not sure if they're even going to bother this time, because this time they're really trying to do it. They're not going to call it 6th edition. They're not going to call it D&D 1 even at the end of the day. I don't think. Maybe they will call it 1 D&D, but they're trying to do something. At least their stated goal is to just do an iterative improvement as opposed to a replacement game, right? Something that takes all the stuff they've been doing in the different books like Tasha's, whatever, Cauldron, and making that into the core game and finding the stuff that works better and making a nice mix of it. But theoretically, all your stuff from 5th edition will be compatible with 6th edition, which is the first time you've ever really seen that in any edition jump for Dungeons and Dragons.
So
we'll see if they actually hit that.
So you're not panicking that this is a new edition and we'll have to throw out everything that we've done with 5th edition.
Well, my business plans don't depend on what Wizards does, so that helps. If I was a publisher who's basically writing on that, and that was the only thing I was doing, I might be a little panicky. But as a player, I mean, the dirty secret is that nobody makes you throw away your old books. You can keep playing 5th edition forever, right? They're the old school revolution movement, right? The OSR is essentially the same thing. These are guys saying, let's go back to white box, right? Let's go back to the blue box, the Holmes edition of D&D, and play that stuff. There's no reason you can't just keep playing it. Sure, you won't be involved in the Adventurers League and stuff like that. So if a lot of your time and effort and ego is wrapped up in that kind of stuff, then you're going to want to move over to the next edition, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, what they're really asking you to do is plunk down, the money for the 3 core rule books as they revise them. And if you bought them once 7 years ago, I think it's fair to say you maybe could pitch in another $150 every 5, 6, 7 years. And so,
Oh, and I will.
Exactly. If you're buying them through a discounter, it's probably half that. So,
and saying that it's backwards compatible really helps with them still trying to sell books between now and the time those new books come out. They don't want to say, oh yeah, by the way, the stuff we're about to release, our new Spelljammer, that's completely useless in 18 months.
Yeah, that's what happens a lot when you're trying to do the edition stuff. They basically slow down and stop publishing anything of any real lasting value in that period while they're developing it, because people know the rumors get out. Now they're being open about it. They're like, yeah, we're doing a new one. Like, okay, great. But why do I want to buy this stuff or spend money and time and get invested and get my heart into it if it's just going to disappear, right? But they're very clearly not going to do that, or at least that's what they're stating they're not going to do. We'll see what actually happens, because as a game designer, you know that your plans and reality don't always mesh up. Right? You're like, this should work.
Have you looked at the playtest material?
I have. I haven't been keeping close tabs on it because I'm nose down on other stuff I'm working on. But I did read the last couple of weeks, or the first couple of weeks of stuff, and it's interesting what they're trying to do. I think, again, some people like I'm doing a public playtest for the Marvel role-playing game I'm working on right now. Right, when we're doing updates every couple months. We don't have quite the staff. Thank you. There we go. We don't have quite the staff that Wizards has for running Dungeons and Dragons. In fact, I'm the only writer on staff for this stuff. Not even on staff. I'm a freelancer. So we're not putting it out quite as quickly as they are. But I can tell you that when you're putting out stuff for playtest, a lot of times you're like, here's an idea. Let's see if everybody hates it. Right. But just because you put it out there doesn't mean it's going to make it into the final game.
Sure.
Right. You put it out there and say, let's see what people think. And if they say, oh God, and you're like, okay, no, I didn't mean that. You're going to go back to the other stuff. That's the point of a playtest. The point of a playtest is to figure that stuff out before you commit to it for the next 5 to 10 plus years. Right. And, that's actually a really exciting time to be involved with a game because you get to test this stuff out. It's like your game master, your dungeon master, whoever coming up to you and saying, hey, I got this idea let's just test this out for a game. Right. And at the end of the game, you all say, nah, that worked. Or you say, no, that made everything so much better. Let's stick with that. And people do that with house rules all the time. It's just that Wizards is now doing it on a massive scale with thousands of respondees. So I think it's a good thing.
No, that's exactly what when I looked at that playtest material, I'm like, these are all just house rules for the most part.
Yeah.
And I've played Dungeons and Dragons since '79, maybe. Yeah. You can tell from the gray hair, the gray and the beard. And I don't think I've ever played the game perfect as written.
Yeah, they always say RAW now, rules as written.
Yeah.
Almost nobody ever does. I mean, especially with this back in the day when you were learning, when I was learning as a kid too. Nobody else you knew played, right? So you had to read them out of a book and do the best you goddamn could. Nowadays, people have, video tutorials. You have people teaching how to play. You can go watch any one of the number of actual play videos that show you how to do this stuff, right? But man, we were just making stuff up back then. And if you've been doing it for 30 years, whatever, 40 years, you start thinking, yeah, this is how it's done. And that's really is how it's done.
And back then, I couldn't figure. I had, for the life of me, I couldn't figure out what the fuck the difference was between a hit die and a hit point.
Yeah, there's stuff like that. Like we actually started out playing basic Dungeons and Dragons, and then he started releasing AD&D books, and we're like, I don't know how these match up, right? So we ended up having basic characters facing off against AD&D monsters and just getting their asses kicked, right, constantly, because the AD&D monsters were always more powerful. And we're like, well, how come? Why is that kobold killing me? I don't get this.
So I looked at an overall aspect. We see why they're changing D&D for we've already talked about how it's, they want to, corporate, make it this great big IP. And I think this new playtest is definitely opening up to a broader audience. And we've seen a broader audience come into the game with all the streaming. It's just not us, nerdy white guys playing in garages anymore.
Yeah. I think it's going to be amazing because, the movie's going to come out. It's going to reach more people than D&D ever has. D&D's actually got a pretty decent brand penetration, as they call it. Like probably, 90 to 95% of America knows what D&D is at this point, right? Or at least heard of it. If they that might be that game those evil satanic kids over there play, but it's still something they've heard of.
Sure.
But when you have a movie come out, that's essentially a 2-hour advertisement for your product, right? So it's not a bad thing to have up there, and it's going to get more people thinking. The people who are D&D curious but a little hesitant, people are like, that seems like the geekiest goddamn thing, and then they're going to go up there and say, look, there's Chris Pine doing a great job. He's having a ball. We're going to go look and see Matt Mercer, the guys from Critical Role Online, having a ball. Maybe it's something I could get involved in too, right? So it's not just a hobby for the engineers over in the corner, right? It's something that everybody can get into.
Right. It's a great concept to come to the local comedy club and watch a bunch of stand-up comedians play.
Exactly. I agree, right? It's the kind of thing that makes it seem less scary for people, right? Because, man, I've been running playtests of this Marvel game with people who've never played any role-playing game before. Some people at Marvel, Penguin Random House, other places, whatever, retailers that, comic retailers that don't generally play games. And it's, they come up and they're, no, it doesn't matter what age they are. They're just a little nervous and they start playing and I get them into it. They're like, this is the best thing ever. Why haven't I been doing this for years? But they just don't know, right? It's just something else that's out there. It's another art form they haven't touched on yet. They're aware of it, but they've never actually taken part of it, right? And the thing about D&D, role-playing games in general, is that they're a participatory art form, right? And you can't just, you can sit there and watch now that there are all these actual play things, but the best part of it is getting involved and doing your own thing in it, right? Seeing how you can learn how to improvise and make your own decisions and have fun with it. And it's wonderful watching people just step up and learn that. I think as D&D becomes bigger and bigger, it introduces more people to the idea of role-playing games in general. And that means that those of us who, let's say 10% of the market is non-D&D stuff, right? If that market grows by another 100 million people, that's another 10 million people the rest of us can actually maybe draw into our stuff. So I don't think it hurts the rest of us who are doing smaller role-playing games or other role-playing games to have D&D be a big thing, right? It breaks that barrier for people to get them interested in that form of art.
Let's move on to superheroes.
Sure, I've heard about those.
So is the Marvel multiverse game, is that going to be backwards compatible with the TSR Marvel game?
Well, you know what? We did literally rip off every version of the game. When I say that, I have read and or played just about every version of the game. This is actually going to be the 5th version of a Marvel role-playing game coming out, right? And so when I was going back to it, I'm like, okay, what are the parts of this that we like the best, that we can, that we thought worked the best? So like karma points come from the original game, and we use that in the game too, right? Like, okay, that makes sense. Heroes get points for doing good things and encourages good role-playing. Why would you not want to have that in the game, right? So, we do try to make it, it's not going to be backwards compatible, but on the other hand, man, just from doing the playtest rule book that came out in April, that as soon as like the slightest glint of a rule comes out, you got people out there, or Dan's got a copy, you got people out there who are literally lining up to make characters, right? Like people just got armloads of characters that they're doing this stuff with, way more than I've made, right? Because I'm tinkering on the basics. They're like, let's make, Jack of Hearts and just go. And I'm like, okay, we don't have the powers for that yet, but go ahead, have fun. and it's been fun to watch people just take it and run with the ball. Of course, the heartbreaking part for them is that we're changing the rules constantly.
Yeah.
It's a play test. We've got update 1.3 is going to be coming out within the next few weeks. Don't know exactly when. That's up to Marvel and whatever. We're shooting toward the end of the month, but we'll see what happens. And that's going to change the rules yet again, right? 1.2 is a massive change of the rules. Update 1.2. So 1.3 is more along those lines.
You kicked. Explain the clever D616.
Oh
The
yeah,
D616, which actually I was just in the room when we came up with it. I wasn't the mathematician behind it. I named Mike Capps, who used to be the president of Epic Games, was the head writer for Gears of War and Fortnite. You might have heard of Fortnite, right? He worked on stuff like that, but he helped us come up with that. It was me and him and Johnny in the room working on this stuff. And
before you go on, what came first? You just said we have to make it 616.
No, we basically sat down and said, okay, we're going to come up with a game, right? And we're going to do a role-playing game. The original idea was to try to do something that wasn't too arty, right? Because when you're doing role-playing games, it's especially if you've been doing it for decades, the tendency is to want to do something that's cutting-edge art form stuff, right? But this is not going to be a cutting-edge art form game. This is going to be something that's a mass market game. So we want to have something that people can absorb easily. That is hopefully good for people who've never played a role-playing game. The first version we came up with was, I think, a lot too crunchy, and we've streamlined the hell out of it since then. But so part of that was saying, okay, what's the most popular game in the world? It's D&D. We want to have something that D&D players can be comfortable stepping from this over to our game. We don't want it to be something where it's like going from this and then them being in a fun house of mirrors, not knowing what the hell they're doing, right? So we don't want to make it too unusual for people who are already in this kind of stuff. Not saying that we're lifting anything, but we just want to make it something where if you're playing this game, you can move over our table and you can understand the basic concepts, right? So we're not using like stones or cards or Ouija boards or whatever else to come up with random stuff. We're going to use dice, for instance, things like that. We're going to use target numbers. You're going to roll against a number to try to beat that number. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. So the D616 system is a 3D6 system essentially, but one of the dice is a special die. So the middle die is the 1 in the 616. And of course, 616, if you're a Marvel fan, is the number of the Earth. The Marvel Comics universe is Earth 616, which is a joke based upon DC. And DC always had Earth 1 and Earth 2 and Earth 3 or whatever. And we're like, oh, that seems pretty self-important that you think you're number 1 and 2, right? And Marvel's like, yeah, we're Earth 616. We're way down the line. We're just doing our thing. So the dice work like this. You roll the 3 dice and you add them up, just like you normally would, right? So on a 3D6, your average roll is going to be a 10.5 because it's 3.5 per die. So you're looking at like a 10 or 11. But then that middle die, the Marvel die, which is an off-color one, will have a Marvel logo on the 1, or you can just mark on it with a Sharpie for all I care, right? Put an M on it, and when that shows up, that number 1 counts as a 6 actually. And it does something fantastic to your roll. So if you're using a power, there's actually most of the powers will say, if you get a fantastic result, this extra special thing happens, right? If you're just punching somebody, you get double damage, right? It's like a critical hit, right? So if you roll a 616, that's the best roll you can get because not only does it add up to an 18, but it gets you that extra special effect as well. So that's how the D616 system works. Now, you can also manipulate the dice. So if you have karma points, you can spend a karma point to re-roll one of your dice and take the higher of the 2 results. Kind of like having advantage in Dungeons & Dragons, right? So for instance, if you roll a 3 and a 4 and a 3, like, okay, I got a 10, but that Marvel die in the middle, maybe I can get a 1 out of that, or maybe I can get a 5 or a 6 and improve my die. You'll re-roll that, right? And if you're in the middle of the game and you have edges, which are like advantages, then suddenly, you get to re-roll dice in your favor. If you have trouble, like things are going badly against you, you're wounded, it's dark, it's rainy, Aunt May's yelling in your ear, then you have to re-roll one of your dice and take the lower of the 2 results, right? And those stack and cancel out each other. So if you got 3 troubles and 4 edges, then you get 1 edge, right? So you don't have to keep re-rolling dice over and over and over. And that's basically the dice system, right? And you're often working against a target number that is related to your opponent's abilities. And they have 6 abilities and they spell Marvel, right? Marvel. We've changed the name. Marvel, M used to be might, is now going to be melee, and then it's accuracy, resilience, vigilance, ego, and logic. So are your different things. And those stats, they're not your basic like I'm stronger or I'm faster. These are actually more combat oriented stats. And then we'll have powers that allow you to amplify your damage or your accuracy or whatever for that as well, based upon what if you're super strong, you take the super strong strength, and then you get to multiply your damage from there.
Okay, I have to ask you.
Sure.
Back in the 80s, what was your superhero game?
I did play a lot of Marvel superheroes. I actually used to run it for the RPGA at Gen Con back when I was in my teens. In fact, I had some early modules that I ended up selling on eBay for a lot of money at one point. They were just like pure printouts that I'd been given when I was a kid. But I also played the hell out of Champions, right? Champions was a big game for me. In fact, at one point, I went to a convention called RockCon down in Rockford, Illinois, at the old Wagon Wheel Resort, and I won the Champions tournament. And my game master was a guy named Mitch Gittleman. And Mitch has gone on, he's done tons and tons of stuff in gaming. He's currently over at Harebrained Schemes as the lead developer for BattleTech and Shadowrun and all that with Jordan Weissman over there, right? But this is a guy who was a few years older than me. He was in college at the time. He was running the tournament. He was also best friends with Ray Winninger. Ray and Mitch go way, way back. And Ray is currently the man in charge of Dungeons and Dragons over at Wizards of the Coast. And by the time Ray was also, in those days, Ray actually went on to become the developer for Underground and DC Heroes over at Mayfair Games, right? And so there's all these superhero lines going through it, right? So a lot of us have been doing this for a long time, know each other from from even the mid 80s. It's kind of funny, right? But that was my first time meeting Mitch, and it was like, yeah, I won the tournament. I got a copy of Champions. I'm kicking ass. I had a great time. And the first major book I ever wrote by myself, I had worked on a few other gaming products before that, was a book called Western Hero, which was a Wild West supplement for Champions,
right,
for the hero system, right?
Had it.
I think third edition Champions or whatever the hell it was. And you had to like, this is back when we were learning how to computer color stuff and nobody knew how to color balance. So it came out just this really ugly looking coloration of a Frederick Remington print. Yeah, so I've been involved in superhero gaming since I was, basically starting out. I even played Villains Vigilantes in high school too.
I remember my first Champions tournament. I got my ass handed to me right away. And I'm like, wait, you build characters just for the tournament? You're not supposed to have characters with backstory and
yeah, exactly.
All this sort of, I mean, if my ethereal character that has a sword that affects non-ethereal, I mean, I'm just, what? So much for my hydro-powered guy. I was like, whatever.
Robin Laws and Ken Haidt have their podcast that they do, right? Ken and Robin talk about stuff.
Yeah.
The recent episode I was just listening to, they were talking about the fact that back in the 80s, we had role-playing game tournaments, right? Nobody does that anymore. You go to Gen Con, it's not role-playing game tournaments. They're all playing in the Adventurers League. They're playing together against this common string of stories they're playing through, right? But they're not competing with each other. There's not a winner at the end of every round, right? But
Right.
back in the 80s, literally you would play a game and you would vote on who was the best player or role player or whatever, or whoever got the most points depending on what things you collected for treasure or killed monsters. Christ, when I was like 14 years old, I think 13, 14 years old, I played in a tournament here in Beloit, Wisconsin, where I am now. I moved back home many years later. And I won a copy of the Temple of Elemental Evil that Gary Gygax signed for me right there, because we won the tournament and made the newspaper.
Wow.
It turned out that we had, it was 4 kids, 5 of us, 4 kids that we needed a 5th to play. And the guy who was didn't know anybody, didn't bring anybody to play with, was a guy named Steve Benson, who was a reporter for the local radio station. And he was on our winning team that won the games. And I'm still in touch with Steve and all the guys from that game. It's kind of funny.
That's
fantastic.
amazing. Yeah. You got any questions there, Steve?
No, I mean, well, so many, but the main one was about the dice system. The idea of not having a D20, the idea of saying, oh, let's just what people have. I wasn't sure if was it meant to be purely introductory? Like you can, the nice thing about it is you can just get this book and you have the material, everything you need to play.
Assuming you've ever played any kind of game in your life, you probably have some dice in your house, right? 6-sided dice, not 20-sided dice. Now, nowadays it's not hard to find 20-sided dice, right? But I mean, you could literally go raid your copy of Yahtzee or Monopoly or whatever the hell you got lying around the house and start playing the game. again, back when I was a kid, I bought a copy of D&D when they didn't have any dice, and so they included a sheet of chits in it that were numbered, and you were supposed to trim them out of this piece of cardboard. They looked like little counters from Squad Leader, and put them in a cup and draw them out one by one, and that's how you rolled your dice, right? So those were crazy days, but so if you have a need, you come up with a way to do stuff, right? As a designer, sometimes I've sat down and figured out, okay, how would I replicate a D20 with just 6-sided dice? You could do it. It's just tedious, right?
I've been laying awake late at night because I'm working on an idea that's in my head for a game, because I always am, but it's going to be pot influenced, cannabis influenced RPG. So I'm trying to think of the 4D20 system. And I've been going over that in my head for the last 3 weeks now, losing sleep on it. I think I hit it. I think I figured it out a little bit last night. So
you should hook up with the Looney Labs guys. They've been doing influence games for decades. And not just in the design. I mean, they actually they had marijuana flux or pot flux or something like that, right? Andy and Kristen over there have been big proponents of pot legalization for a long time.
So as a designer, what do you? I mean, I think I know the answer to this. Do you prefer the fluff or the crunch when you're working on putting?
Man, well, fluff is a lot easier to write, but crunch is where the game meets. It's where the rubber hits the road, right? If the crunch doesn't work, the fluff doesn't matter, right? If the fluff doesn't work, the crunch will still go and people will change the fluff. But if the dice are off, if it feels off, well, the funny part, of course, is if the dice are off, people just house rule everything anyway.
Right.
And again, that's one of the dirty secrets of role-playing game design is that no matter how badly you do it, somebody's going to play it and they'll fix it at their table because they're going to fix it to what they prefer anyway, right? Now, that doesn't mean it's not your job to make it the best game you can in the meantime, right? That's really what it is. I have a long conversation. I've done a number of panels with a guy named Reiner Knizia, who's one of the top board game designers in the world. Done a bunch of panels with him over the years. And he's always like, I always thought with the mechanic, right? Because he's this very German mathematician. And I'm like, no. You start with the idea and then you work the mechanics into it. But at the end of the day, what you want is something that takes the mechanics and the theme or the crunch and the fluff and dovetails them together so it looks like a seamless whole, right? Like it always works together. And the neat thing about it is as you're doing game development, they tend to feed on each other, right? So if you're like, well, do the dice work for what I'm trying to do here? If not, then I can change the dice. But do the mechanics, does the theme work with what I'm trying to do here with the dice? If not, I can change the theme, right? You can change things to actually match up with each other. It's harder when you're doing a licensed product like the Marvel game, for instance, right? Because you have certain expectations that are built in. I can't go back and change 80 years of Marvel history just to make the dice work better, right?
Sure you can. You wrote the Marvel Encyclopedia, can't you just?
I could try, right?
Rewrite the encyclopedia.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote 2 editions of the encyclopedia, I wrote an Avengers book, Captain America book, a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, the funny part is when I was writing D&D stuff, like I would write D&D novels, and they're like, "Well, this magic item doesn't exist." I'm like, "Here, let me design that for you. Here you go." It's not that hard, guys. We're making shit up here.
Was there a sense with the Marvel that you wanted to start off by the rules on starting with this first book? It has to account for Galactus and Hellcat.
Yeah, there was a lot of that, right? We wanted to be able to go from Aunt May to Galactus. I don't know if we actually got Galactus in the rules, although I'm comfortable going up to like Captain Marvel and the Silver Surfer, right? But I think at a certain point, giving hit points to Galactus is kind of beyond the pale, right? It's beyond the point. You shouldn't defeat Galactus by punching him out, right? Unless you happen to have a battle that's like, here's a Celestial versus Galactus, then sure, maybe we can pull that kind of stuff off, right? But nobody on planet Earth is going to punch out Galactus. Even the Hulk is going to struggle with that kind of stuff. So,
well, according to the new 1D&D, if you roll natural 20, it can be done.
That's an automatic success. Yeah. But the funny part is in 1D&D, you still have to roll damage after that.
Right.
So doesn't matter, right? We assume that Galactus has essentially infinite hit points, right? Or at least 1 million. And good luck, it's going to take you a long time. But yeah, that was the remit, was to come up with something that could handle characters all the way from from street level, from a shield agent to Aunt May, all the way up to the Silver Surfer or Starbrand or whoever else you want to have, Captain Marvel as your top level. And I think we managed to succeed at that. The original core playtest rulebook, I think the math was off because we were trying to make it expand too high. And one of the problems of using not a problem, one of the features of using a 3D6 system is that it's a bell curve as opposed to a flat curve.
Right.
Which means that, just a movement of like 2 points in one direction on a bonus is actually pretty damn big.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge.
Yeah. You do 2 points of D&D, it's like, it's a little bit, right? But you do 2 points in a 3D6 and you could make it from 50% chance to an 80% chance or
it's
higher.
not 5% increments. Now it's like a real big deal. Yeah.
It depends where you're on the curve too. So it makes things harder to calculate. And then when you throw in the Marvel die that can mess things up and the karma system and everything else, you're like, all right. So, so we spent mostly since then, I've been working on shoving the math closer and closer together, which means that the people who are lower level can actually hit the lower rank guys. We have 6 ranks essentially, right? So lower rank characters can actually have a chance to hit the higher rank guys. But we've now worked it out so that even if you hit them, you're probably not going to damage them too much compared to what they have. And hopefully it all works out, right? It's a matter, as I was explaining to the guys at Marvel as we're playtesting and stuff, it's like as soon as you pull one lever on something that you think is kind of balanced, everything else topples, right? So you got to kind of pull, you want to maybe, your 2 choices are pull this one a little bit to see what happens, or pull this one a lot and then pull a bunch of the rest of them a lot and see if that balances things out, right? So eventually we got to the point where like, you know what, we're just going to start throwing switches and levers and see what the hell happens. And I think we're at a good point right now. I think people have been pretty happy with update 1.2 and 1.3 is looking pretty good too. So hopefully people will be happy when they see it.
Is there a light at the end of the tunnel on the playtest?
Yes. Well, I mean, I'm currently writing the book is mostly due out in June, right? So I'm writing it right now. So at a certain point, we have to say that's it, or we push the book off. But hopefully, we just say that's it, and then instead of doing public playtesting, we'll still be doing a lot of private playtesting right up until the point the game releases, because that's the way it is for any game. You're like, oh man, can we do that better? Could we? You're always thinking that. They often say the games are not finished; they're published, right? At some point, you just take it out of the designer's hands, and you throw it at the graphic designer or whatever, the layout designer, and it goes, right? And then the designer's still there. It's still tinkering away at the game. By the time the game actually hits shelves, you're like, oh, but I got 16 better ideas, right? This is how you end up with new editions and errata and stuff like that. But,
so you're already, so you heard it here first. You're already working on the 2nd edition.
No, you're always working on another. You're always working on a way to improve the game, right? But my hope for this game is that we have something that's rock solid enough that we wouldn't be tempted to do another edition for 5 to 10 years, right? And if we do anything that adds to it, it would be incremental things like saying, okay, we have a new magic system we just came up with for here, right? Or this system for psionics we think is much better than what we originally had. So try using this. But the trick is, of course, you can continue to use the original stuff that we published. But if you want to do something that's a little more exciting, try this. We think this fits. I mean, magic in the Marvel universe is a huge nut to crack, right? There's so many different types of it. And when the main rulebook comes out, we'll have something that'll be how do I want to put this? It will be an umbrella that will fit a lot of things generically, right? But we're not going to be able to fit every type of magic and do that in the core rulebook, because that would take up probably a rulebook by itself.
Now, are we skewed more towards the long history of the comics, or are we getting more MCU?
At the moment, we're doing comics, right? We may end up doing MCU stuff at some point in the future. That's really not up to me, right? That's up to Marvel and the Marvel Studios people and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, the comics are influenced by by MCU stuff as well these days, right? Every time a new movie comes out, you see the influences of the comic books, right? That's not by accident. Obviously, people are like, well, that thing's making billions of dollars. Maybe we should, And the funny part, of course, is that more people see those movies than have ever read the comics. So you want to make sure that when they come to the movie, they get something that looks something like what they expect, at least roughly. So, so we're basing the game is based in the 616 universe. But one of the interesting things about that, and the reason was called the Marvel Multiverse game, which I pitched as a title before all this multiverse stuff came out, like 2 years ago. And they're like, yeah, that works well with our plans. I'm like, oh, you have plans? Okay, sure. But the reason I did that is because every game you sit down to play has its own continuity. It's its own universe in the Marvel Multiverse, right? And if you want to, like let's say the three of us playing a campaign. That's our Marvel universe, right? But then say Dan decides that he wants to take his character and play in another one. Well, you're just jumping from one universe in the multiverse to another one, right? And maybe you come back to our table, and you have that continuity. You have your own individual continuity for your character that jumps to different universes, and then we have our own continuity for the game that we're playing together, right? And it works wonderfully as far as a metaphor for moving characters around from table to table, and it fits perfectly with the Marvel multiverse, which is kind of fun.
Okay, how about supplementary material? Am I going to get like a who's who of just all the superheroes and all their stat blocks together, or just am I getting the 12 in the main book?
You're going to get a lot of characters in the main book, and we haven't announced anything else after that except for one other book, so I can't talk beyond that.
Right.
But we do have the Cataclysm.
I remember I told you nobody's watching this. Well,
Marvel watches everything.
Dave Gallagher's watching it right now, but he's the only one watching.
Marvel PR watches everything, right? Now we've announced the first adventure book, which is the Cataclysm of Kang, which is a time traveling multiverse adventure, and that's going to be something that takes. There's, like I said, 6 ranks, right? And you can create your own characters in this game. So what we did is we're going to have 6 adventures. They're like an anthology adventures, and we're going to say, here are some characters you can use with each one of these. They go from rank 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you start street level all the way up to cosmic. But if you want to, you can create your own characters and then play them and level them up, rank them up essentially all through that. So that's going to be a big, thick book that's going to have a bunch of characters in it as well. And hopefully show, the idea behind that is to show our narrators, as we call our game masters, the ways that you can run different ranks of games, right? So this is how you run a low-level game. This is how you run a mid-level game. This is how you run a game with people of different ranks. This is how you work your way all the way up to cosmic. This is how you manage to play a game that your characters are not quite powerful enough for, right? So if Spider-Man steps up and he's suddenly in a cosmic adventure, how does that work, right? And we'll have rules for that kind of stuff. So
that's great.
Yeah, so it just to make it easy on people. It's not like people can't come up with ways to do this. Experienced game masters go, "Oh, this is how it works." So like, great, but we want to show people what our ideas are for that kind of stuff, and then they'll take it and run with it on their own. And like I said, every one of those games out there is going to be a separate universe in the Marvel multiverse.
No, I'm already working on my Planet Hulk Dark Sun crossover. So
nice, I love it. I wrote a box set for Dark Sun way back in the day. Mine Words of the Last Sea. That was fun.
Well, following the idea of the success of 3rd edition and 5th edition of D&D, is there going to be a SRD equivalent in 2 years' time for?
I don't know. I don't think the Marvel has any plans for that kind of stuff. Marvel tends to be fairly tight with their properties, right? And one of the things about D&D is because you can put it out there because they have settings, but they have very few characters that people worry about, right? Drist. The characters from Dragonlance, whatever, those are the characters that people care about. But you might notice you don't see a lot of that stuff in the published product, right? In fact, Wizards hasn't had a novel department for something over 5 years, maybe longer now. And the only books that you see that have come out have been ones that Bob Salvatore and Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman have set up separate licenses for and taken those to bigger publishers, right? Wizards is not publishing those. In fact, for a long time, the only fiction you could find for 5th edition were the Endless Quest books that I wrote. I wrote 6 Endless Quest books for not for Wizards, for another publisher that licensed that, and those are the only fiction you could find for D&D for many years. So, but with Marvel, you got your static characters, the people are playing or people are writing stories about for over and over and over. So you can't just say go ahead and take Spider-Man, do whatever the hell you want. Go ahead and take whatever and do whatever the hell you want. Right? So that's where I think the difference is. People want to play in the Marvel universe, but Marvel's not probably going to want to let you run with their characters.
Right. Yeah. Just like I can't use a Beholder in any published
some other game, right? Exactly. But you can use it in your personal games all you want. And honestly, whatever you do at your own table, nobody's looking over your shoulder except Google and Amazon.
Now, tell me this: did you guys think a plan ahead that Disney will just go, okay, take that rule set and now make us a Star Wars game?
If it happens, it happens. There's nothing that I know of in the works for that right now. I know there are other licenses out there for that kind of stuff. However, when we were developing the game, we're like, if it turns out that we can use this for other things, better yet, right? And obviously Disney, which owns Marvel, has got a slew of properties that would be a blast to work with, right? I mean, all the way from, like you're saying, Star Wars, Aliens, Predator, all the way to Disney princesses, right? And all the Pixar stuff. Let's do a Toy Story game. Let's do whatever. But that's really not my call. So we'll see what happens. But it is a system that I would be comfortable enough tailoring to different things. And that was definitely one of the, as we're coming up with, we're like, well, in any case where if it's going to break it, we really want it to be superhero-y, we're going to make it superhero-y for this, right? But if we can make it something that's more general, we'll let that be as well. Right?
Okay.
We do want it to be to be a good superhero game, right? More than anything else. Because honestly, if the game sucks out the gate, it's never going to get transferred over to anything else, right? But the sales even on the playtest rulebook were really strong, and helped to prove to Marvel and their upper management that this was something worth investing in and doing well. So I've had a lot of great backing from them. They've been fantastic.
Is there going to be $1 million Kickstarter?
Marvel has never done its own Kickstarter, and Marvel is publishing these books. So I don't think there will be a Kickstarter for these. Now, Marvel has licensed some stuff that has gone to Kickstarter, like Simon does, the Marvel Zombies game, or whatever else. But Marvel itself has never done a Kickstarter. And honestly, as a part of Disney, I can't imagine that they really need to.
Right.
Although, on the other hand, I mean, not like if there's somebody in Marvel in upper management at Disney is a little bit worried about it, you can put it out. Hasbro does their own crowdfunding nowadays for some of their stuff, right? If you want to get Hero Quest, you go on and they have their own crowdfunding site for Hero Quest. Like, when we have enough orders for this, we will start producing it. Like, okay.
I only ask because Marvel's watching this, and
there you go. They are. Right? Please, Marvel, do whatever. Yeah, whatever gets more product out there, more people's hands, and has more fun.
Sure.
All right, let's switch gears.
Sure.
Shotgun and sorcery.
There we go.
Now, what made you decide? We're going to talk. I got both here.
There we go. Good man, Dan.
What made you go with Cypher for the original?
Well, the reason Shotguns and Sorcery was a series of novels that I wrote that was originally going to be a 3rd edition role-playing game setting that I had sold to Mongoose. I licensed to Mongoose back in the D20 days, right? And then my wife got pregnant with quadruplets, and I'm like, yeah, guys, I don't have time to do any of this stuff. So, which is a natural consequence of these things. And so I shelved it for a long time, and then Robin Laws asked me for a short story for an anthology he was doing. I dusted it off and started writing stories, and I wrote some novels. And then the guy then it got licensed for a enhanced ebook series that was done by these guys who did, I think it was Steampunk Frankenstein, something like that. And they did a second Kickstarter that flopped and bankrupted the company after they had licensed this. So mine was gonna be third in the line. They're like, nope, we're not doing it anymore. Sorry. But the guy who was the art director on that went on to be the president of Outland Entertainment, which is now publishing comics, novels, all sorts of good stuff, anthology, fiction as well, and role-playing games. And he was so enamored with Shotguns and Sorcery, he says, I want to do something with this. And I'm like, well, if it's going to be a role-playing game, I've done it before. I'll just do it myself, right? And then after a year or two of him bugging me, I'm like, fine, I don't have the time. I'll just, we'll let you do it. So I gave him a license. And back then, 5th edition's OGL had not been opened up. 4th edition had never gone to an OGL. So we didn't have that D&D thing to lean on, right? So we had to go look for another system or design our own. And Outland wasn't really interested in coming up with a full system from scratch because they weren't going to be doing, a house system for a role-playing game. And so we went and looked at different things that were available. And, there were a lot of great ones out there like Fates or Powered by the Apocalypse or whatever else. But they really liked the Cypher system. I liked it too. Going to circle back, the guy who was my editor on that Western Hero book way back when was Monty Cook, right? So who went on to found Monty Cook Games, which publishes the Cypher system that Monty Cook designed.
It's convenient that Monty Cook founded Monty Cook Games.
It is, right, man? Imagine if somebody else had, right? So Monty and I go way back, and I actually am good friends with like most of the people in his company. Some of them have worked for me before. I've worked with them on many, many projects, and they're great folks. So they gave us a good deal on a license. Now they've opened it up, actually. Now you can actually do your own stuff for Cypher system. But at the time, it was closed down system. So they licensed it out to Cypher, or the licensed Cypher system to Outland, and they did a whole role-playing game on it. We hired in Rob Schwalb, who is another good friend of mine who's done a lot of Cypher system work, but was also a designer, a core designer in 4th and 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. He came in and did all the rules for it. Right? He basically took the Cypher system and said, okay, this is the way to do the fantasy the noir fantasy version of this, and did a great job with it. And I wrote all the background stuff and the fluff. He did the crunch essentially, and then we tailored it all together. And so that's how we ended up with the Cypher system. Then what happened, though, unfortunately, is that the guy who was the publisher of Outland, who was so excited about it, had some personal issues going on. He ended up going through divorce, and the game got delayed over and over and over again. So it took about 5 years for it to come out. And when it finally came out, the license was expiring. And I looked at Jeremy Moeller, who's the guy who did the cover artwork, too. He's a great artist, right? And I said, Jeremy, if you want to continue with this, we can extend the license. But if this is something that's just been a millstone for you, you want to hand it off, I'll finish the writing, you'll finish the artwork, and I'll continue to publish it from here. We'll make sure that everybody who paid for anything in the Kickstarter gets made whole, that they get what they were promised, right? And legally, I was not obligated to do that because it wasn't my project. I didn't run the Kickstarter. It wasn't my company. But because it's my property, I felt obligated. There's a moral obligation at a certain point to make sure that if people are putting money in because they trust you, then you should help make that happen. So that's what we did. So I took over publishing the game. We ended up having my son come in, my son Marty, who's the oldest, who just got married, to help write some of the supplementary products for it. We hired an Owen Casey Stevens to do the Pathfinder supplement that we had promised the conversion for that. And it went fairly well. Honestly, I wasn't trying to make money on it at that point. I just wanted to make sure everything everybody had been paid for got done. And so now we're selling those on Drive-Thru RPG, and the numbers trickle in. And I suck at marketing, so I'm a decent designer, but I'm not really good at getting the word out after that because I'm too busy doing other shit. But then I'm like, well, we got all this artwork, and the OGLs come out. And this was originally a 5th edition game, and Marty's sitting there just chomping at the bit to do something. So I said, Marty, would you be interested in doing the 5th edition version of Shotguns and Sorcery? So we did. He wrote all the rules for that. We hired in Rob Schwalb again as the developer for that to make sure it all fit, because very few people know D&D as well as Rob does. And again, I wrote new fiction for the book, and then we ran a Kickstarter for that last November, and I was literally boxing up books just 3 weeks ago to send them out to people. So we actually fulfilled the Kickstarter. We have one last bit to do, which is the virtual tabletop stuff that we had promised. Shard Tabletop said we'll give everybody free copies of Shard Tabletop. And it wasn't going to cost us anything, but they were going to take like $500 off our royalties, blah, blah, blah. So I actually hired my son Patrick to do that because he was interested in doing the virtual tabletop stuff. So he's got that all done right now, but he's just inserting images into the document for that. And once that's done, hopefully within the next week or so, that'll be everything everybody was promised for the whole game. So for the whole Kickstarter.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, so it's kind of become this little family business too, where I'm kind of coaching my kids who are interested in the stuff into it. Marty and Pat are both kind of following my footsteps that way. The others have their own interest in whatever they're doing, but and they all love going to Gen Con. We love, I take the kids to Gen Con every year, Game Hole Con, which is coming up next week, and they love going to conventions and playing games. So Marty and Patrick are more interested in doing it as a career as well.
That's great.
Will there be more Shotguns and Sorcery, or now that you've got that,
that's a good question. We took everything we did for the Cypher system and crammed it into the Shotguns and Sorcery 5th edition book. So there's literally nothing sitting around waiting to be done. So probably we're not going to do too much for Shotguns and Sorcery. If Marty gets a great idea and wants to do some more with it, be happy to do that. Honestly, if somebody came up to me and said, I want to do this, I would talk to you about it, right? But like I had a friend who's like, let's do a GURPS edition. I'm like, yeah, I'm not touching GURPS. But if you want to do it, let's talk. We'll figure it out. But I'm not gonna bust my hump on GURPS right now. So, as much as a fan as I ever was of the system, it's just not where I want to be at the moment. So, so we'll see. I mean, I also got the rights back to Brave New World, which was a dystopian superheroes game I created back in 1999. That was sold to Alderac Entertainment Group. So I have the rights back to that. We'll probably end up doing something with that at some point. In fact, probably would have done something with that at some point already, except that I was working on the Marvel game and I didn't think it was kosher to be working on 2 superhero games at the same time, right? Because you start robbing Peter to pay Paul, essentially. You're like, well, I have this great idea for this thing, but maybe I should save it for mine. Like, no, you don't want to.
Really good idea. Where do I put it? Yeah.
Exactly. So, so we'll see how that pans out. But once this core rulebook for the Marvel game is done, then I'll feel comfortable going back to Brave New World and doing something with that. So.
Well, I'm eyeing Shotgun and Sorcery because I came up with a concept that, well, let's just say I own the domain of Noirmancer and Noirmancy for
Nice.
noir.
Noirman, nice.
So yeah, the whole PI noir type of stuff. So yeah, I mean, I'm looking. I've got a huge map I designed of a city over here hanging on my wall. You can't see. So, I'm always thinking, and I'm always jumping into other people's playgrounds to get dirty. But
I'd love to see that. I always love to see it. Honestly, when people post pictures of their games that they're playing or the books they picked up, it just always makes my day. Right? It's like, because you work at this job, you do this stuff. I'm in my office right now. This is where I spend like 95% of my work time. Right? And then the rest of the time is out messing around with my kids, going to conventions, whatever. But you're not there with people when they're playing the game. You don't know how it goes. It's just like when you write a novel, you're not there with the reader, right? So it's wonderful to see people's reactions and to have them having fun with it, right? It's just great.
Are you involved in any campaigns right now? Do you get to play at all?
No, I don't. I mean, I'd like to, but I'm usually too busy doing core game design. Right. And also, I mean, role-playing games are not my main thing. They are now this year because of the Marvel game, but mostly it was a side thing that I did. I did it for a long time as a full-time profession. And then I started just doing more other stuff. Like I was writing the Marvel encyclopedias. I wrote a lot of novels. I've written like 35 novels have been published. I also started doing a lot of video game work, which, is a lot of fun, pays pretty well, all that kind of stuff. But but the idea that I would come back and do a full-on role-playing game was like, yeah, I'm just probably never going to get to that. Maybe the Brave New World thing. And then Marvel came by and said, "Are you interested in doing a Marvel role-playing game?" I'm like, oh god.
How do you say no to a project like that?
Corleone, right? Just when I think I'm out. But I play games for fun, but a lot of time I play board games, one-shot games, card games, stuff like that. Stuff that I can walk away from. Right. Also, I'm a shitty game player. A lot of game designers are, because when I play a game, I'm not trying to win, right? I'm trying to see how the game works.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And as soon as I figure out how the game works, I'm not as interested as I was. I'm like, oh, now I get how that works. What's the next thing? I mean, I got stacks of games are unopened, right? Because I'm like, oh, that looks cool. And I'm like, oh, but when do I have the time to play? I'll have to corner the kids over the holiday break or whatever. Like I literally have 12 games sitting right next to me right here. Probably 10 are still in the shrink wrap that I play with the kids, and we just got to find some time to do it. But then you have to learn each one of them and play it and whatever. Yeah. And then I'll play it once, and then I'll move on to the next one.
I mean, I'm constantly buying RPGs, but to play them, no, but to steal from them is
exactly.
Yeah.
Right? What you do, you read them, they inspire ideas in you. There's a long tradition. I was just reading a couple different histories on Dungeons and Dragons, right? And essentially D&D started that way. It was, Gary and Dave just riffing off each other and swiping ideas from games that they had played in the past. And as they say, everything is a remix, right? You're always just taking things that you've been influenced by and coming up with new ways to express them. Nothing wrong with that. That's a wonderful thing. It's how creativity works. So, there's nothing new under the sun. Even Shakespeare knew that. Of course, he stole rampantly too, so that works.
Well, now that Matt has solved the riddle of roaming the labyrinth of creativity, I guess we could just call this stream over. And so is there anything you could talk about that you have lined up after you're done with Marvel?
More Marvel stuff. They signed me on for more Marvel books, so there's going to be more books. That's a good sign.
Novels are part of the game.
Games, yeah, more games. Yeah, I have some friends who publish Marvel novels. I make better money doing other stuff. But I do write tie-in novels. Like I wrote my last novel I wrote was a Minecraft Dungeons novel, right? So it's been a while since I wrote one, but there'll be more novels coming out, which I can't say anything about because they haven't been announced yet. One that I've owed Tor for 10 years. I finally have a new editor. Long story, but my original editor was fired for sexual harassment and blah, blah, blah. And it just kind of got nuts. So now I sat down with a new editor and we set a deadline for myself. So hopefully we'll have a novel out in 2024, an original book. I had a game I worked on called Hard West 2. That's a video game, came out on Steam back in August. And that's a turn-based tactical shooter. It's a lot of fun if you like weird Western stuff. I did a game I wrote the dialogue for, what's it called? Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus, which is a mobile game that just came out. I wrote the dialogue for all the first-person the one player adventures that go through the one player campaigns. I'm working on currently. Let's see, what can I talk about? I'm working on the Marvel game. I'm working on a novel I can't tell you about, and I'm working on a video game I can't tell you about. But I was in Sweden for a week working on a video game, so that was fun. So, and that's what the guys who did. I wrote a game called Biomutant a couple years ago, and they brought me back in for their new game that we're developing, and I'm going to be one of the writers on it. So
That's great.
It'll be fun. And I'm working on other games I can't tell you about too. NDAs are terrible.
Never a dull moment. Yeah.
Non-disclosure agreements. God, I just wish I could just sign one and tell everybody I won't say anything until you tell me to. Right? That's just the easiest way. But I have signed dozens, if not hundreds, of non-disclosure agreements over my career. It's just crazy. Because when you do these things, sometimes you sign them and then they just talk to you about like, no, I'm not interested.
Right.
Oh, I signed the agreement. I won't tell anybody about it.
All right. Well, I think I'm about finished my coffee here. I think we've run about an hour.
There we go.
Want to thank you, Matt, for joining us.
Oh, it's a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
You enlightened us, and hopefully, and David Gallagher, who's watching right now.
Hey, Dave.
Hopefully I'll have some I can't say Neuromancer.
Noirmancer.
Yeah, all I need is William Gibson on me.
Yeah, exactly.
Stuff to show you later. I'm looking forward to when this comes out in its final form and playing
June
with that.
23 and Cataclysm of Kang in July of 23. So.
I could do Cataclysm of Kang comics and comedians.
There you
go. No, again, thank you very much. And for anything, Matt Forbeck, you got Forbeck.com to follow you, and you're Matt Forbeck on all the social medias, correct?
M. Forbeck.
M. Forbeck.
M. Forbeck or Forbeck. I mean, Google is your friend. People know how to find people. Not that hard. Forbeck. That's all you need to know.
And Matt filled us all with information this week. Steve and I will tell you about all our boring stuff going on next week. Because I rambled on and on about the Marvel DC lost cease and desist that I got for superhero last week. That was a whole hour right there.
I'm sure.
So anyway, thank you very much, guys. And Steve, I will see you next Sunday. Matt, we'll talk, and hopefully I'll be at a con sometime soon to
That'd be good. I'd love that.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Matt.
Take care, guys.